Hello, everyone, and welcome to Asian Viewpoints with Mary Sitt. Our guest today is an award-winning journalist who got her start working as an intern for the late, great film critic Roger Ebert. Monica Ng has been working for more than 3 decades in Chicago. She started at the Chicago Sun-Times, moved over to the Chicago Tribune and WBEZ, and since 2021, she's been working as a reporter at the newsletter Axios. Monica, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Mary. Great to be here.
Before we go further, full disclosure, my grandfather and your great-grandfather were
Actually switched.
brothers.
Right. No. You're right. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, my grandfather and your great-grandfather was, I'm just learning the family tree. A lot of talent in that family tree.
They were brothers. Yep.
Right, they were brothers. Your great-grandfather and my grandfather. Got it.
Yeah.
So, how did Roger Ebert become your mentor when you were only 15 years old?
Well, it's the old story of nepotism in Chicago, which made the world go around for a long time. Full disclosure, he and my mom were dating when I was a teenager, and he said, "Hey, does one of your kids need a job this summer?" And I said, "I'm not going to be doing anything. I'll just be watching TV all summer." So he said, "We need a copy clerk at the Chicago Sun-Times," and I said, "Well, I don't know what a copy clerk is, but I'll try it." And from that day on in 1985, I was hooked. All I ever wanted to do was be a journalist.
So, how did he inspire you?
Well, he wrote incredible amounts of stories every week as if it was just like the easiest thing in the world. And so, when I would ask him for help, because I quickly, even as a copy clerk where I had to like deliver the mail and answer the phones, I was also able to start writing articles from the teen point of view. They wanted to know, what do teens do for fun on weekends? What is the teen fashion?
You got published as a summer intern?
I
Wow.
was a copy clerk. I was in the union from day one. I started in the Chicago Newspaper Guild from day one. And so after summertime, I worked as a copy clerk summer. And then during the school year, I would go to high school from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m., then work at the Chicago Sun-Times from 2 to 7 every night. So
Wow.
I started working there, and it was full year round until I went to college. And yes, they said, "We'll teach you how to write." And so, Roger wasn't around much. I was really the copy clerk for the features department, and they helped me. They said, "Okay, let's look at what you wrote." All right, that's not how we do it. And I learned through trial and error. I
Oh,
think I only
that's
took one
wonderful.
journalism class my whole life in high school.
Wow. So, Roger was the first film critic to ever win a Pulitzer Prize. So I read somewhere.
Yeah.
And he actually mapped out your whole career plan right at the beginning. He said, you are talented. And what did he tell you? You
Well,
need to do
he
X, Y,
was
Z.
amazed that we were both born on June 18th, not the same year.
Right.
But
Of course
he's
not.
like, "Oh my gosh, this must be fate." He said, "Monica, you're going to go to the University of Illinois, just like I did. You are going to, on quad day, the first day where everybody meets on the quad with the clubs, you're going to join the Daily Illini, and you're going to become a great journalist." I was like, "Okay, I guess." And, I loved writing for the Chicago Sun-Times and then the Daily Illini. And he said, "And I really think you should do a year abroad. Probably England." And so I did. And, and my sister and I both went. And he said, "I don't want you guys struggling. I want you to be able to see all of what London has to offer, to go to the theater." So he would even send us stipends to make
Oh,
sure we were
wow.
enjoying our life in London.
Sort of like a little fellowship for you. Like here,
Yeah.
enjoy England and enjoy your. So he sort of declared and manifested your career. I said, you would do this, this, and this. And it came to pass, right?
Yeah, and when I and then I broke off and I went to the Tribune, which was the competitor of the
Right.
Sun-Times. But we remained friends until sadly the day he died, when I went to say goodbye to him.
What a special relationship.
Yeah.
Monica, you have written about all sorts of topics from pickleball to politics. Do you have a favorite topic you really enjoyed writing about?
I love writing about food and food's ability to bring people together. I mean, it's kind of been my specialty over there. Food and health and the environment have been them.
Mhm.
But I wrote about Iris Chung, who you
Mhm.
probably know wrote The Rape of Nanking, because she was also at the University of Illinois when I was there, and she
Okay.
was at the Tribune just before I got there, and her tragic end led me to write a long magazine piece about what happened to the woman I had talked to 8 months earlier, before she ended up dying by suicide, because she was so full of hope. She had this new book and she was going to be interviewing all of these GIs from World War II who'd been tortured, and she was going to bring justice to this world. She had this beautiful young son who was my son's age at the time.
Mm.
And when I heard the news that she died by suicide, I couldn't put it together. So I spent 6 months retracing her steps, talking to all of her friends and family, and looking at the history. And I almost didn't want to do the story because it was so difficult, and her family didn't want me to be talking about her mental health struggles at the time. And to this day, I still get letters from people who say,
Wow.
"Thank you for writing that."
On a lighter note, let's talk about food and a book
Yes.
you recently co-authored. It's called Made in Chicago: Stories Behind 30 Great Hometown Bites. How did you choose the restaurants to write about, those 30?
Well, so we took a look. My co-writer and I, David Hammond, we said, we've been writing about Chicago foods for so long, and a friend of mine said, you should really compile that in a book. The University of Illinois Press has an imprint that really wants to highlight culture of the Midwest.
Mhm.
So I said, I guess I'll write a book proposal. I didn't feel like I had the time, but I said, okay, David, if you take 15 foods and I'll take 15 foods, then we'll have a whole book together. And so we decided it had to be something that we could prove through documents was invented in Chicago, or at least a version of it was really popularized in Chicago. And then we had to say it has to be served at more than one restaurant. And then we had to really go in search of the origin of it.
So this book talks about something called steak and lemonade and something called taffy grapes. What are those things?
So that's what I went and I worked for a show called Curious City. And so people would write in with questions about Chicago and say, what is this? So they said, why do I see all these steak and lemonade stands all over Chicago? What are they, especially on the South Side? And then into Indiana and Kentucky, there are Chicago style steak and lemonade stands. And I'd never heard of it. So I went and searched, and I found out that there was a man from Jordan who came to Chicago and decided to open up fast food stands. He said his two biggest sellers were a steak sandwich and this kind of lemonade slushy that was inspired by a kind of drink called limonada in Jordan, where you take lemons, ice, and mint. And he adapted it here by taking, yes, a slushy lemonade, but putting lots of syrup. So it's like purple and green and blue. And people love it. And then taffy grapes. It's like a taffy apple or a caramel apple, but you dip grapes in either white chocolate or caramel, and then you roll them in peanuts, and then you eat them with toothpicks, and people love them.
Food is in your DNA, Monica. Your grandfather started chop suey restaurants. First of all, let's explain chop suey. Is that really Chinese or is that Chinese American?
There are a lot of origin stories. Some that say there was a diplomat who was traveling through San Francisco during the gold rush, and he came into a restaurant and they didn't have anything left, and they said, well, let's just chop up bits and pieces. And there is this term "chop suey" in Cantonese that could mean bits and pieces. Other people think it was actually a restaurant dish that already existed, and it was derived from those words. But generally, it's bamboo shoots and a little bit of pork, a little bit of bean sprouts, kind of stir fried with a bit of a sauce. But it's not that popular anymore. It was huge. I mean, in the 1920s, at the turn of the century, there were a dozen chop suey restaurants just in downtown Chicago.
And your grandfather had many of those restaurants, is that right?
That's right. My great-grandfather, Ham Yun, he opened up one in around 1921. He came to Chicago in 1911, and around 1921, he opened up something called the Golden Pumpkin, which is called the largest chop suey cafe in the world, a
Wow.
2,000-seater. I mean,
Oh
there
my
are
goodness.
parts where you can see, like, I can't believe how many tables there are. And they had a floor show. I was talking to one of my great aunts, and she's more than 100. She said, I remember the floor show and the dancing girls. And I have a historian who's talking to me about the house band there. They had Chinese restaurants. A lot of them were known as dine and dances at the time. They were known as these racy places where you would hear music and you would dance, and girls would dance with boys. Oh my gosh, it was crazy. One historian said they could be compared to a rave today. They were that kind of racy place to go. So the house band was Thelma Terry and her Playboys. One of the only women band leaders in the 1920s flapper era was the house band at our restaurant. restaurant in, and this was Joe Eng. This was this side of my family. Sorry, it was Joe Eng who had that restaurant. And then he ended up opening at least a dozen more across Chicago.
That's amazing. So you are now using some of that history to write a young adult novel. Tell me about that.
It's called The Happy Happy Dumpling House, and it conjectures what would happen if a young girl was living in Chicago and her father was the chop suey king around the mid 20th century. And then he disappears one day, and she finds out why their restaurant is the most popular in Chicago, because they give you this complimentary dumpling. Everybody who enters, it's like, oh, welcome to the Happy Happy Dumpling House. Here's your complimentary dumpling. No matter how grumpy they are, as soon as they eat that, wow, everyone is happy and everybody wants to be in this restaurant. And so after her father disappears, she realizes that their three top chefs, they're magicians. They're actually alchemists.
Wow.
And he accidentally stole them from a warlord who wants them back. And she must master alchemy and kung fu to protect Chicago and the restaurant and her family from the warlord.
Monica, did this come to you in a dream? How did you get this idea? I love it.
Just over the years, bits and pieces were accumulating, and I put the manuscript together, and then I just kind of put it aside. And then this fellowship came around, and they said, "Hey, journalists, have you like never published your first fiction, but you want to?" 400 people applied. I got one of the slots, and I'm so glad because I really think I have the path to move and have this novel published.
How do you feel about the future of journalism?
You need to have journalists, accountable journalists who are paid well enough so that they can stay on the story, watching out for the people to find out who might be who might be polluting and hurting the water and hurting the air, or just not spending our money responsibly.
Right. So you feel hopeful.
I feel it's shrinking, and I hope we can create new models that can leverage the small staffs we have to try to do as much as we used to. But I feel somewhat not hopeful because we're all like, okay, billionaire, please come and buy us, and let's hope you're not gonna mess with the journalism. And sometimes that's not the case, and sometimes they're like, I'll find a new toy, and then the hedge funds come in and they chop even more staff, and that means less coverage, fewer watchdogs over the city.
Well, you're writing your first novel. Hopefully it'll be a bestseller. You can keep writing more novels.
That's right. Then I will buy the newspapers. I will buy them and say, okay, keep watch over the city, people.
Monica, thank you so much. And if we want to read your articles, we can go to axios.com/Chicago. Is that it?
Absolutely. You got it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Mary.
If you enjoyed this show, please click the like button below and be sure to subscribe to this channel so you'll never miss a show. I'm Mary Sitch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.